The autumn Eli Hartman turned 12, he started hauling wood that nobody in Holt County wanted. Not firewood, rotten wood. The soft, crumbling cottonwood logs left behind when a windstorm tore through the old shelter belt along Route 11. Wood so far gone you could break it apart with one bare hand. Every Saturday morning, he'd hitch a flatbed trailer to a four-wheeler and work his way down the gravel roads, knocking on doors and asking politely. And farmer after farmer told him the same thing. Take all you want, son. That's headed for the burn pile anyway. Then they'd stand at their fence lines and chuckle. Not mean laughter. The soft, puzzled kind that neighbors trade over coffee because it got stranger. Eli wasn't stacking the wood. He was burying it. Long trenches, dug by hand behind his family's barn, filled with crumbling logs and covered back over with sandy soil, like the boy was holding funerals for trees. By the first hard frost, he had buried more than 300 logs, and he hadn't explained himself to a single soul, not even his father. But the following summer, the driest anyone could remember in 40 years, every farmer on that road would come stand at the edge of his field, and not one of them would be laughing. If stories of patience, family, and the old wisdom hiding in ordinary places move you, subscribe and join us every week and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. Holt County sits at the eastern edge of Nebraska's Sandhills, where the ground rolls in long grass-covered waves and the soil runs pale and loose, more sand than loam. It's honest country, but it keeps a hard rule. Water doesn't stay. Rain that falls in the morning is gone by supper, drained through that sugar sand faster than roots can drink it. The Hartmans had farmed the same quarter sections for 4 generations. Dean Hartman, Eli's father, ran corn, alfalfa, and a small cow-calf herd. A careful man, slow to speak, patient with everything except drought. Eli's mother, Carol, kept a garden of serious ambition behind the house. And then there was Grandpa Walt, 79 years old, most mornings parked at the kitchen table with black coffee and a cedar box of his own father's farm journals. Emil Hartman had come over from Bavaria in 1921 and farmed to that same ground through the Dust Bowl, writing everything down in a careful, tilted hand. It was Walt who first noticed that Eli watched the fields differently than other boys, not the crops, the ground under them, where rain pooled, where it vanished, and why. The summer Eli turned 12, Holt County entered its 3rd straight year of below-average rainfall. The irrigation well on the east field was pulling from deeper than it ever had, and the district had cut pumping allocations across the county. Dean's alfalfa held on, but the garden quarter and the sandy dryland corners were failing a little earlier every year. The county extension agent, Ray Kessler, came out that spring and offered what advice he could. Mulch heavier. Plant drought-tolerant varieties. Water deep and less often. But you can't mulch your way out of soil that won't hold water in the first place. Eli listened to every word. Then he asked a question Ray wasn't used to hearing from a 12-year-old. When it rains an inch, where does the inch go? Ray considered. Straight down through. Sand doesn't hold it. Nothing down there to catch it. Eli nodded slowly. That was in April. By September, he was collecting logs. Here is what Eli had found, and what most of the adults around him had never quite put together. In the cedar box, in a journal dated 1936, Emil Hartman had written about something he called his waterbeds, hügelbäder in the old country. trenches filled with rotting wood, covered with soil planted on top. Emil wrote that his mother's people had built them in Bavaria for 100 years, and that in the driest summer of his life, those beds stayed green while the fields around them burned. The old man wasn't guessing. He'd stumbled onto real soil science decades before anyone gave it a name. Rotted wood is a sponge. As a log decays, it opens into millions of tiny air pockets, and it will soak up several times its own weight in water, then release it slowly, right where roots are searching. Fungal threads spread from the buried wood and carry that moisture to whatever grows above, and buried wood feeds the soil itself. Agronomists estimate that every 1% increase in organic matter lets an acre of soil hold roughly 20,000 more gallons of water. In sand, that's not an improvement. That's a different farm. Rain wasn't Eli's problem. Keeping it was. And 300 rotten logs under a Nebraska garden were about to become the reservoir his county didn't know it had. What Eli built that fall was not elegant. It was a boy's version of an old man's idea. Trenches marked with twine, dug with a spade and a steel bar, wood laid in like cordwood and covered over. His father watched from a distance the first weekend, said nothing, then quietly came back with a second shovel and helped him dig without asking what it was for. That was Dean's way. The first failure came in spring. Eli had run short of rotted wood and filled the last 2 trenches with fresh cottonwood from the storm damage. The beans planted over those rows came up yellow and stunted, worse than plain sand. He went back to the journals and found Emil had warned about exactly this in one underlined sentence. The wood must be old. Fresh wood, as it starts to rot, steals nitrogen from the soil above it. The microbes that break it down feed on nitrogen first and give it back only years later. Rotted wood has already paid that debt. Eli dug out both rows and refilled them with crumbling oak, plus a layer of composted manure between the wood and the topsoil. The second failure was the design itself. Emil's journal showed mounded beds, piled waist-high the Bavarian way. Eli built 2 exactly like the sketch and watched the Nebraska wind strip them dry by June. So he flipped the idea upside down. No mounds. Sink everything. Trenches 3 feet deep, wood at the bottom, finished level with the field so the wind had nothing to grab. Getting enough truly rotted wood took all winter. That problem was solved by Gus Braun, who ran the sawmill in Atkinson and had a coal pile of punky oak slabs a decade old. Gus let him take all he could haul and never charged a dime. He said he liked the boy's stubbornness. By planting thyme, 40 rows of Carol's garden quarter, half an acre, sat on buried wood. Then the sky shut off, and the whole county found out what Eli had built. The drought that summer was the worst in 4 decades. 34 days without measurable rain, with a hot south wind that didn't quit. By late July, dryland corn was curling white, and Ray Kessler was driving county roads, doing crop loss assessments. That's when he passed the Hartman place and stopped his truck in the middle of the road. Half an acre behind the barn was green. Not surviving green, thriving green. Sweet corn standing dark and straight, squash vines running heavy, beans climbing like it was a wet year. Dean had noticed it weeks earlier. He'd pushed a spade in a foot down between his son's rows and found the sand dark, cool, and damp in a summer when the neighboring field powdered like flour. Ray did the same thing with a soil probe. Twice. Because he didn't believe his own reading. Word traveled the way it does. The farmers who had handed Eli their rotten logs, the ones who'd chuckled from their fence lines, drove out to see for themselves. They walked the rows without saying much, One of them knelt, pulled a handful of dark, damp soil from ground that should have been dust, and let it crumble through his fingers. Then he looked at the 12-year-old standing at the field edge with dirt on his boots. "What in God's name is down there?" "Wood," Eli said. "Your wood." He walked them through it. The trenches, the sponge, the nitrogen mistake, the sunken beds, his great-grandfather's tilted handwriting from 1936. The laughter was gone. In its place was something quieter, something that takes longer to arrive than laughter, but lasts considerably longer. Before they left, 3 of them asked if he'd help lay beds on their places before spring. He said he would. The Kentucky farmer and writer Wendell Berry once put it this way: "The soil is the great connector of lives, the source and destination of all." Eli Hartman grew half an acre of vegetables through the worst drought in 40 years. But that wasn't the harvest. The harvest was a boy who thought to ask where the rain went, the patience to read a dead man's journals and take them seriously, the humility to fail twice, publicly in front of a county, and build again. Real agricultural knowledge rarely comes from new equipment. It comes from paying attention and from understanding that what everyone else calls worthless might just be waiting for someone to figure out what it's for. Eli is 13 now. There are buried log beds on 4 farms in Holt County, with more planned for fall. And Grandpa Walt is still at the kitchen table with his coffee and his cedar box. One journal now has a bookmark in it that Eli made him promise never to move. What farming lesson stayed with you from Eli's story? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. Tell us where you're watching from. This community reaches further than you'd think. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. There's a new story every week.